Hey, what is going on, guys? Danny here. Welcome back to the channel, and I hope you've all been doing well. I wanted to make this video as a follow-up to my last video where I compared three different CPUs, the 9800X3D, the 14900K, and the 285K in Battlefield 6 to see, which one was the fastest, or rather the smoothest. I'm going to preface this video by saying this is just going to be more of a rambling or rant video, whatever you want to call it. I never really planned on making it in the first place. Because stuff has just come up and I wanted to share my thoughts. I felt like there was just some stuff that I need to say. Now, from that video I posted, ultimately it came down to whichever CPU you had, regardless of if it was AMD, Intel, Arrow Lake, Raptor Lake, Zen 3D, whatever, regardless of which one you had, you're going to have a great time. That's really what it comes down to. And, you should be happy because DICE, they did a really good job with the way the game runs and optimizing it. But one of the reasons why I made that video is because, as I explained, there were articles from various tech outlets going around sourcing a streamer who claimed that the 9800X3D was like 30% faster than their friend's 14900K with similar GPUs. And, when I first saw that result, I was like, that really doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And I think, I'd rather test this for myself and see what's actually the case. When it comes to Battlefield 6 testing, it's somewhat difficult to get a direct comparison because there can be so much variance between matches depending on what's going on. If there's, lots of action, vehicles, how many players there are, what map you're using, all of that stuff comes into play there. But even if you're not doing like a direct run-to-run comparison, you should still be able to tell or get a good idea after just doing multiple playthroughs in matches where the hardware stacks up with each other. But in my video, I had showed the difference between the 14900K and the 9800X3D wasn't nearly as large as that 30% plus gap that, people were talking about. Now, granted, I did test at 1440p because I was like, that'll make the test more applicable to that demographic that's actually buying these CPUs. But I was also testing with low settings with just the textures on high. But even with those settings, we're still heavily CPU bottlenecked. So you can still show differences in CPUs at that resolution in this game, but also that was the same resolution that the streamer had compared as well, so that's what I was aiming for there. What's more interesting is that, in an actual full match of Conquest, the 9800X3D's advantage had basically been diminished over the 14900K, and I also noticed that it dipped more compared to the 14900K, and many of my viewers in the comments were pointing that out as well. But, like I said, whichever chip you choose, you're going to have a solid experience. Even the Arrow Lake part did remarkably well in Battlefield 6. I'm just a guy who wants to see healthy competition in the market. And ideally, I don't want to see the CPU market become as one-sided as it is like in the GPU market, because we all know what's going to happen when something like that happens. I'd like to see, consumers have as many and viable options to choose from, because then you get great prices and, it's just an overall good time for everyone. Hence, on my channel, one of the things that you guys need to understand is that I don't just show out-of-the-box numbers. I don't just press the XMP button in the BIOS and call it a day and then hit the benchmark button. There are loads of channels that certainly do that, and if you find that is what's most applicable to you, then, by all means, go watch their videos. I personally like to tweak my systems, my CPUs, GPUs, and RAM. And I'll go the extra lengths at making sure, there's some tweaks I've done in the operating system as well. And that's how I choose to showcase my testing and benchmarks, because personally, I feel like that's just showing more of a full story, or, when you're comparing hardware. Now, I'm not saying that, I'm someone who goes to extreme lengths in comparing hardware. Like, I'm not telling you guys to delid your CPUs or attaching an LN2 pot to your GPU or shunt modding it or something like that to squeeze out, all that performance. All I'm doing is I'm applying tweaks to my system that anyone can actually apply for that matter, and seeing, how much extra performance we can squeeze out of these parts without doing anything extreme. So, when I see people in my comments section who are like, well, you should be comparing stock for stock, sorry, that's just not going to happen. If you guys do want that sort of testing, like, by all means, go see those other channels that are testing that way. I don't cater to that mass audience. And to be honest, I actually don't cater to anyone. I cater to myself. That's really what this comes down to. All the testing and benchmark topics that you guys see on my channel has been done to satisfy my own curiosity. That's really it. Where I get an idea in my head, such as, what would happen if I disable E-cores and hyperthreading on a 14900K, benchmark 40 games, and then test it against its stock configuration. all of that was actually to satisfy my own curiosity. And then I decided, you know what, I'll publicize my results as an extra bonus and share my findings in case anyone else is actually interested in it. And you know what, we're just gonna have some fun with it. That's really about it. That's really what this channel comes down to. So, you know, with the next video I'm working on, I saw two GPUs that seem to be within margin of each other, according to, you know, everyone else. And one of those GPUs is a 5-year-old card, while the other one just came out a few months ago. So, you know, I had this idea in my head that, you know, is someone better off buying that old used GPU on a discount, or should they go the new route? And that's what my next video is going to be about. Just buying it for myself and then putting it to the test. And then I'm just going to share the results with you guys. And, you know, hey, whoever finds that enjoyable or gets something informative out of it, or it helps their buying decision, you know, that's great. That's an extra bonus for me. But I guess you guys can think of my channel as like my own tech diary in a way, where it really just comes down to me exploring my own thoughts and ideas and just how I want to tinker around with the hardware. And then, you know, I'll publicize the results for fun. But anyways, you know, we went off on a bit of a tangent there, and circling back to the main topic on hand, Battlefield 6's CPU testing. So, you know, a few days ago, Hardware Unboxed on his channel posted a video showing the 9800X3D and the 14900K. And, you know, right off the bat, when I saw his video, it was clear that the 14900K was set up in a wrong way, because if you saw his overlay, the CPU was running around 220 watts, and it was either getting thermal or power throttled because it wasn't even running at a locked 5.7 gigahertz. And along with that, he did say he loaded up, you know, just XMP and he called it a day, which, like I said before, for most people who do that, that's the testing they might find applicable to them. I personally don't think it's showing the full story, but, you know, to each their own. And because of the way that Steve tested, it did widen that gap, and that did put the 9800X3D ahead of the 14900K by around 35%, if not even more, which from my own testing was obviously not the case, and I did show my results there. Now, one of the reasons why I decided to just make this video is because I posted a screenshot to my Twitter and my YouTube community post showing how at 1440p native with a mixture of high and low settings with a 5070 Ti in my system, it was producing about the same FPS as their result with a 5090 at 1080p low settings. And, you know, the comments I got from that post were pretty eye-opening, because it told me that there's a lot of people out there that just simply don't know how CPU and GPU bottlenecks work. And along with that, they just don't know how resolution or performance scaling works either. And then I got comments saying that, why aren't you testing at 1080p low settings like he was? Why are you showing a picture of 1440p versus 1080p? And I was like, that's the fucking point. What do you think would happen if I decided to test at 1080p low settings like he did? Do you think my performance would go down? Because as a matter of fact, it would only actually make his performance numbers look worse. Apparently, some people seem to have this weird misconception of CPU bottlenecks, that if you increase the load on the CPU more, then the performance is going to go down. And that's just not how that works. You can make your CPU bottleneck more prevalent in a game and still actually get an FPS boost. And all that's happening is the load has shifted more towards the CPU, but if it can still process and pump out data to keep the GPU fed, then you're still going to see a FPS boost at lower resolutions. So here's an example of what a GPU bottleneck looks like. I mean, apparently people don't understand how this works, so let's take a look at this. This is a test clip of a previous video I did from when I was showcasing ultra and high settings, but this is Alan Wake 2 maxed out on my RTX 3080, and you can see GPU usage is basically maxed out at 100% or 99%. So this is a GPU bottleneck. It doesn't matter if we had a 10 gigahertz 9800X3D with like 1,000 megabytes of cache, performance wouldn't increase here because the GPU is tapped out. Now, when it comes to CPU bottlenecks, yeah, it can get a bit more complicated, because if you're not fully seeing your CPU at 100% maxed out, there will still be scenarios where, yeah, the CPU is still the primary bottleneck there. You know, a prime example of a game that runs this way is Baldur's Gate 3. It doesn't matter if you test that game at 4K, 1440p, or 1080p, you're going to see the same FPS across the board. That's what I've noticed. Test in Act 3 and you're going to see the same thing. So you know what? I had some time over this past weekend, and thankfully it's good that we did have a second beta, because I hopped on, found a match in Liberation Peak again, and I tested at 1080p, this time with low settings that so many people are suggesting I should have done. And that's the footage you're seeing now. And I actually dropped in a match that was already well underway. So this isn't a situation where, you know, there's players loading in and it's kind of empty right now. This was already a match underway that had a lot of chaos going on in it. And as you guys can see from the gameplay, I'm averaging around 250-ish FPS with my lows around 200. And that's on a 5070 Ti that's not even overclocked. This sample can hit around 3.3 gigahertz, so that would just be another bump. But here it's just undervolted, so do keep that in mind. And while I use a separate capture card for my test bench so I don't incur a loss there when I'm showing you guys my results, this is just my main test rig. So I had to test using the NVIDIA app to record, which incurs about a 5% loss to the FPS and the lows. So I could have pushed things even further if I decided to overclock my GPU and if I just pointed the camera at the screen the old-fashioned way. And yet, for some reason, Hub's 5090 couldn't reach this level of performance, let alone exceed it. So, for those who wanted 1080p testing, there you guys go. All it does is actually make my point stronger. Also, if you take a look at my CPU, it's running around 180 watts, which, I'm not saying isn't high, but it's also not 225 watts that, he was showing in his system. And it looked like his chip was just being run into the fucking ground. So I don't know what the hell was up with his system. But my clocks are also locked and stable, and this isn't even a heavy overclock or anything. It's just kind of stock. Also, this is a 24-core CPU, so I'm not sure exactly what people are expecting in terms of power draw when it comes to Battlefield 6 and high core count CPUs. It's gonna run hot. It's gonna run with a lot of wattage, and it's the same case if you look at the Ryzen 9950X or 9950X3D. Those are higher core count CPUs, and they consume a lot of wattage as well. That's just what's gonna happen. So, making fun of a 24-core CPU part and then comparing it to an 8-core part is just disingenuous, if you ask me. But in his conclusion, it's just ironic that he makes fun of people who are saying that, no, the 9800X3D is not 30% plus faster, and then, claims that they don't know what they're doing, but then he turns around and then does the same thing and doesn't know that, his system's not working right, or doesn't recognize the fact that his chip's just being run into the fucking ground there. And, Steve's done this kind of stuff in the past. There was that mess up with Gear 1 and Gear 2, claiming a Windows update can boost your performance by 20+%, and then saying Radeon drivers have fine wine performance in them and they boost performance by 30+% or whatever. And then just becoming dismissive when, people have challenged his claims. But this is why I'm a big proponent of, if you can buy the hardware for yourself and then test based on your settings and environment, then that's ultimately what's going to be best for you. But, just don't blindly absorb the numbers from a large tech publication. And I'm not saying, you should take my numbers as gospel either. Test it for yourself and see how things go. It's crazy how Battlefield 6's performance topic has devolved into, such a goddamn shit show, because, there are so many people spreading so much misinformation, and that enabled the fanboys to come out of the woodwork. And it's become obvious that, there's so many people out there who just don't know what the hell they're talking about. They don't test the hardware for themselves, and all they want to do is just look at flawed methods and then just parrot that and then say you're wrong. But you know what? I'm just going to be testing the hardware based on the ways I find is most interesting and applicable to myself. And hey, if you guys enjoy it, then I'll be happy to have you guys on for the ride. And for those that disagree, plenty of other channels for you guys to watch. But Battlefield 6's open beta is done, and that's going to do it until we see the game come out in October. But, we'll probably revisit it and see what they do. Hopefully they have a built-in benchmark to kind of get some consistent run-to-run instead of all this variance that we're seeing. But yeah, that's going to do it for this one, and we'll touch base in the next video. Take care. If you guys found this video to be informative and entertaining, then leave a like. Let me know your thoughts and comments down below. Be sure to check out the video description for cool links and ways to support the channel, such as using my Amazon affiliate link. And if you're interested in seeing more content like this, then consider subscribing. I'd greatly appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for watching, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.